Today we are starting Chapter 7, Lesson 1, in which we are going to start to look at how we apply exponent properties that involve multiplication. The standard that we're going to be working on is the standard of using properties of exponents. This lesson is really based on a few rules. These rules are all depending on when you have multiplication involved and when you have exponents involved. The first property, I would suggest making sure that you have this in your notes. The first property is the product of powers property. So what we want to identify is that the name of the property and the name of the property is the product of powers property. So inside your notes, what does that mean? Well, first of all, you have two characteristics. In order to use this property, the bases must have to be the same. So when I say bases are the big numbers. So when we look at this first example, both of the bases are x, therefore the bases are the same. If the bases are the same and you see multiplication, then what we're going to do is we're going to add the exponents together. So the base stays as x, and then simply we add the 3 plus the 5 together, and this simplifies into x to the 8th power. Our second example, our base is y, so we add the exponents of 2 together because we see multiplication. So this becomes y to the 10th power because you're doing 2 plus 8. Now on this next example, we don't see an exponent with x. Anytime you don't see an exponent, you're going to assume that your exponent is 1. So in this case, yes, my base is the same, and my exponent is 1 and 3. I'm going to add those together, and I get x to the 4th power. Now in my last example, don't forget to always check and make sure that the bases are the same. In this one of our bases is x and one of them is y. So you cannot combine anything with this. You would leave it just the way it is. You cannot combine. So I would just note can't combine. The second property that we're going to talk about is the power of a power property. So inside your notes, make sure you have the label of the property, power of a power property. The characteristic here is when you have an exponent with a power inside parentheses and then you have another exponent outside the parentheses, what this is saying is x to the 3rd power is being raised to the 4th power. So what that would look like is you would have x to the 3rd power, so that means x times x times x. But you're going to see that a total of 4 times. So if we continue that, there's 1. Here's my next group of x times x times x. There's 2. And then times x times x times x. So there's 3 sets and x times x times x. So I now have 4 sets of x to the 3rd power. I have one here, I have one here, I have one here, and I have one here. So how many total x's do you have? You can count all those up and see that you have 12 total x's. So what we can do to simplify this entire process is instead of drawing out however many groups of x's that we have, what we could do is we can use the power of a power property and say, okay, since my exponents are 3 and that's being raised to the power of 4, what we're going to do is we are going to multiply those exponents together, and you're going to get x to the 12th, just like what we did when we expanded everything out in our picture. Now if we have x to the 2nd raised to the power of 5, that means you're going to have 5 groups of x squared, so that you're going to end up having a total of 10 x's, so x to the 10th power. On this last example, remember if you do not see an exponent, you can assume that that's x to the 1st power. And here we would again multiply. Well, 1 times 3 is 3, so this just really stays as x to the 3rd power. You remove the parentheses. Now your third property is the power of a product property. What this tells us is that you're going to find the power of each factor and then you're going to multiply. What I think of it is it's very similar to the distributive property, but you're just distributing that exponent to everything that you see inside the parentheses. So when I see w times x inside parentheses, and then inside everything inside the parentheses is being raised to the nth power. So what that means is I'm going to take w to the nth power, and I'm going to take x to the nth power. So I'm kind of distributing that n to everything that you see inside the parentheses. Now it's a little bit different when you see numbers, but not a whole lot different. If we are using the power of the product property, we want to distribute this 2 to everything inside the parentheses. So this would become 3 to the second times 4 to the second. So depending on what the question asks you is, if the question just says simplify, then you might just do 3 times 4, which is 12, and square it, which is 144. But if this says, show me your answer in exponential form, then you would distribute that 2 to everything inside the parentheses, and you would call that 3 squared times 4 squared. Now, back to if you did 3 times 4, you get 12. You square that, you get 144. Well, what happens if you took 3 squared? You get 9. 4 squared, you get 16. And if you multiply 9 and 16 together, you also get 144. So it really just depends on what the wording of the directions is. If it asks you to give your answer in exponential form, then this is what we want. If it just says simplify and give me an answer, then you would want your answer to be 144. All right, now I have 5 examples here. We have to decide which property we're going to use for each of those. And then some of them, actually, you're combining a couple different properties in one. And that's what we really want to be able to focus on, is what properties are being used in specific situations and how do we use them. And maybe we're using multiple properties. So let's take a look at this first one. We have 4 squared times 4 to the 5th. So this is the product of a product property. So my bases are the same. So then simply I add the exponents together. So I have 4 squared times 4 to the 5th. This would become in exponential form 4 to the 7th power. Now my second one, I have a power to a power. So I have 2 to the 3rd being raised to the power of 5. So in this situation, I have a power to a power, so I multiply, so this would become 2 to the 15th. And then the last one, this is where we kind of distribute that exponent to everything inside the parentheses. So you would have 12 to the 3rd power times 8 to the 3rd power. And then your answer is 12 to the 3rd power times 8 to the 3rd power. Now these last 2 examples is where you are using several properties within one. So the first thing that I'm going to note here is in this first example, I need to simplify what's inside my parentheses first. So because I have a power to a power, I have to distribute this 5 to everything inside my parentheses. So I now have 4 to the 5th and x squared to the 5th power. Then I have a 2 times 5, so that becomes x to the 10th power. And then remember, you also had that 4 to the 3rd power out in front. So now what that gives me is that gives me 4 to the 3rd power times 4 to the 5th power times x to the 10th power. But before I'm finished, I look and see, are any of these bases the same? Well, yes. Those 2 4s are both a base of 4. So because I have the bases of the same and its multiplication, then I must add these 2 exponents together, which results in 4 to the 8th power. And then the x to the 10th has nothing common to combine, so it would just stay as x to the 10th. And my answer would be 4 to the 8th times x to the 10th. My last example here, first thing I'm going to start off with is I'm going to distribute this 4 to everything inside my parentheses. So that results in 2 to the 4th. And then I also have w squared raised to the power of 4. So I have a power to a power, which is telling me to multiply. So that's going to become w to the 8th power. And then I still have my w to the 3rd. Now I look, do I have any other bases of 2? No. Do I have any other bases of W? Yes, I have 2 bases of W. It's being multiplied, so then that means that I need to add my 2 exponents together, which results in W to the 11th. Because I have nothing to combine with 2 to the 4th, it stays as 2 to the 4th. So my answer in exponential form would be 2 to the 4th times W to the 11th power. And then the last thing I have for you is what your homework assignment is. So you will find your homework out of your textbook, page 438. These problems are due on, I forget what day they were due, so we'll talk about that in class. But this is your homework for lesson 7-1. Again, if you have questions, please let me know, but I would definitely make sure that you have all 3 of those properties written down in your notes so you have something to refer back to. If you also look in lesson 7-1 at the beginning of that lesson, all of those properties are listed out there as well. But definitely make sure you take the time to write those down and you have a copy of those in your notes to refer back to.